Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's another episode of Prototype, your favorite solo game design podcast. Actually, if there are other solo game design podcasts, let me know because I'm kind of interested. I thought that maybe that field would be a little bit more saturated, but it does not appear to be the case. So we are recording this on the 8th of, I almost said the 8th of Saturday, the 8th of April. It is Saturday. It is going to be Fraudarchy shortly after I record this, I think, or maybe I'll postpone that a little bit so I can get some more work done on CMBW. We'll see. I actually wanted to hop on stream and get some Blender work done, but my schedule has been a little bit weird these last couple of days because I spent the first good few hours of the day that I normally get a bunch of stuff done. I spent that time doing a bunch of work in, what do you call it? Watching the RMR, watching the CSGO stuff that's been going on. So I haven't had the same amount of full attention and full focus that maybe I suspected I would be able to have because I kind of forgot that whole thing was going to go down. So anyway, that is that. We're going to talk about reclamation, the mechanism in CMBW, what it used to be, what it is now, and where we want to take it. It has been boiling under the surface, I would say, because now that the ion cannon has been resolved in a way that I think is so much healthier and so much better and so much more interactive, we'll stress that. I wanted to cover reclamation because it doesn't really fit these things. So the previous incarnation wasn't really reclamation. It was Lazarus Agent, and it was reviving. Now, the Anticathon, you had to actually position the unit on the battlefield and then roll with that. So that was a little bit different because you actually had to, have the unit enchanting other units. There was still some silliness with like, I had to give the Anticathon a really long death animation so that it couldn't perpetually revive itself over and over again super easily, right? There's like a longer window where you could snipe the Anticathons. So it's obviously really silly. The Apostle, though, you would pretty much just continuously spam the ability to enchant your units. And what you would usually use it for is actually you would give it the ability and then you would fly the units out to harass or to drop or to do something else and basically just be a force multiplier that the Apostle doesn't have to perpetuate over time. So we've revised that since. And we've made it a bit more consistent across all the instances where reclamation just occurs on corpses instead of occurring on the units while they're still alive. And this has some advantages and some disadvantages, and we've definitely been sort of thinking about those, exploring those as a community, but also myself, Raffle, Veek7, the two of us have been working on trying to come up with some sort of solution to that, and I've been thinking about it quite a bit because it kind of stands as the primary stupid thing in the game that is left. I mean, even think back to stuff that isn't the ion cannon. You think about the Gladius. Now we have the Gladius need to sort of perpetuate the bouncing by being in the area, right? You think about the Mind Tyrant Tyranny and how our revision of that has made it a lot healthier, where yes, you can still spam it out from a single Mind Tyrant or a series of Mind Tyrants, but you have to keep them in the area in order to, preserve control and stuff like that. And so that positional aspect of it is a lot better for these units. So in these cases where instead otherwise you could just basically assign the debuff and then walk away or whatever. If you think back to the old mind control, and you also think back to the old Gladius implementation where you could pretty much just fire on stuff and we had to make an exception so that buildings didn't. I think they could receive the bounce, but they couldn't give the bounce, and that was our temporary bandage fix because it's a really stupid thing that obviously the buildings can't split, so because they can't move, right? Unless they're Terran ones, and even then it's you don't really want to have to uproot your infrastructure. So yeah, it just didn't make any sense. Now, with that being said, the revision has obviously been a lot healthier, adds a lot more counterplay. You can kind of zone the Gladiuses away from the bouncing if you want the bouncing to cease, or you can split your army either way. If you want to take them head on, then you field units that can shrug off the damage, you try to sustain through it, or you simply split your units such that the bouncing is less effective. Stuff like that can be really useful, right? Now, there's a couple of other things that might be a little bit silly Maybe some of the ways that like cloaking currently works with the whole like witness and wraith thing, that obviously there's not really a huge amount of ambient detection in the game, and maybe that's a lame way to solve the issue anyway. But static defenses with detection might help against that, so that you don't have to like build your own silly detection in order to stop your enemy from scouting you with impunity, like for free basically. There's all these things that could potentially show up, but like I also feel like those are balanced behind resource costs and investments. And like you might get a build order that naturally gives you a little bit easier access to that stuff, but you still need to actually invest in the infrastructure to begin with. And so anyway, it's like a little bit of a different thing. Whereas, the apostle comes out of the captaincy, and the captaincy is a structure that also has madcaps. And I think people are going to figure out that the revised version of the Heracles is pretty good, but madcaps obviously are a staple of tier 2 bio Terran, or just tier 2 Terran in general. The fact that they're a mineral only spam unit, that you can get a lot of power in general. And when you look through the whole ordeal, you look through the way that some of this stuff has been working, you just get this general sense that the apostle is probably given to you for a minimal effort of moving forward. Now it still has a lot of setup, so you still have to you channel the ability before it goes off and reclaims corpses, and the range isn't too big, so unless there's a bunch of corpses stacked on top of each other, you can't really get a lot from just one cast. Now, that's one of the core issues, is that stacking exists in the game, but specifically corpses can always stack, because when you're thinking about how the game works, you can walk over corpses, you can walk over dead units, and then you can have those units die, and then thus creates a corpse pile. And so that would obviously be more of a juicy target for something that simply does AoE corpse resurrection or reclamation, and doesn't really care too much about the amount. So that's one of the first things, is that stacks of units, even if you didn't have stacking air units and stacking workers, you would always have this problem where the units would 100% gain up to potentially infinite value simply from having the fact that corpses could stack on top of them. That would definitely be a huge issue, or is a huge issue now. But beyond that, there's also just the fact that you technically, most corpses exist in a context where the battle has already concluded, or is partially over, or whatever. And the vision of the concept, right? The vision of the idea for the corpses is that they can be used in a multitude of ways for whatever case may be, long after they're gone. And maybe that's the core issue, and we're just seeing it because this is a really powerful ability. I speculate that maybe you could have corpses as a gameplay read, but have them exist in terms of being usable in terms of gameplay and such. Maybe that should only be for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, some smaller window of time that they're still vital and valuable. That would probably help to mitigate the issue, but it wouldn't really resolve everything, right? You'd still have the stacking thing that could still be taken care of, but it would probably make it so that in order to get access to the corpses of my enemies, or of even my own units, then I probably want to spend some time achieving the resurrection, the reclamation needs to happen in the middle of the fight or soon after the fight ends, instead of it can just happen 30 seconds to a minute after the fight has ended. And that is probably a bigger issue, because the core problem we had with the previous version, where you were just basically enchanting hit squads and stuff, and then you would sometimes enchant the army in the middle of the fight, which was the intended use case, but a significant portion of powerful use cases of the Lazarus Agent spell were to enchant units before when they would proc, it wouldn't be in the presence of the apostle at all. They would be off in a dropship, Trojan, or they would be, air units that are going to fight some other units and stuff, and a raid on a base, stuff like that. And that's anti-interactivity, because I've given myself a benefit at transient cost of the energy in the moment and some APM cost, but otherwise not really that much, right? And so that was the main reason why the previous version was really stupid. and again, it comes down to anti-interactivity. In this case, it's also the same kind of thing, unfortunately, because corpses last so long. And we don't want to make corpses last a shorter amount of time, because I think that the readability and also like the mise en scene, the feeling of walking into a battlefield long after it's been, ransacked and wrecked, and there's just all these corpses, all this wreckage, all these bodies everywhere. That's really actually quite thematic, especially once we get higher quality corpse decals in the game, especially when we actually have unique corpses for each unit, so it's identifiable. You will be able to look at that and say, oh wow, there's like a battle here. And so you think about campaign missions, FFA missions, or FFA scenarios where you're playing against other people and stuff. It doesn't really matter what the context is, but if you see corpses somewhere, then oh, this is where the unit is. And it's even useful for like, oh, did I actually kill my enemy's scout because I wasn't really looking? You can look over and see the corpse of the scout, and you can say, oh, okay, yeah, there's their worker corpse, so they are definitely already dead and stuff. And that's why we added player color to corpses as well. Like, all of this stuff is really useful from an audiovisual standpoint in terms of just being a readability thing of like a signal, a tell that, hey, there was conflict here, and there's, the evidence to show it. And, that goes beyond my subjective assessment that that's good and thematic and epic. It's also like actually a gameplay tell, right? Like so many times in, something like a StarCraft 2 or even like a Brood War, especially a Brood War, because obviously the workers, only the drone leaves behind a corpse in Brood War. You really don't know what the state of play is when you see a worker line or something. Like, did he evacuate them, or did they all die from mutalisks or something, as an example? You don't really know the details unless you were there to see it. And that alone is like a huge deal. But even in StarCraft 2, especially if you're not playing with the, the highest settings or whatever, a lot of pros usually like to play on low settings. As far as I'm aware, that's still the case. And, we're not going to talk about StarCraft 2 optimization in this episode of Prototype, but, it's a thing. And, well, not really, I guess. But, okay. That's what they try to do for, like, maximizing their gameplay, but they're losing out on visual tells. Even if there are some sort of like blast decals on the ground, they're probably not easy to tell as far as like what they are, specifically, like, is this, a Reaper corpse, or is it, a Widowmine corpse or something like that? If they're all just like explosion decals, if they even leave them on the low settings, I don't know. So yeah, being able to have unique tells is also a big deal, and something we currently don't sport in CMBW, partly because we have so many units and partly because, unfortunately, like, art is not a huge focus in the current moment. We did have Solstice getting a lot of work done. He's a little bit busy now. And so that was really nice. And lately I've also, I added a bone projectile and the Hammerfall beacon projectile for the ion cannon. And the bone is for these Arcavor Core. The passive. And, these are high tier units, and the ion cannon is a bit less niche than these Arcavor Core, but for the most part, you won't see these in every game, right? So you're thinking, okay, well, why would you add bones, or add projectiles rather, for those two cases? But those are just like things I thought, oh, that's probably pretty simple, and simple enough to get a projectile like this. I should be able to implement this. And the only thing I can think of now is, like, I probably want a frame set for the Hammerfall beacon when it's actually like in the ground or whatever, and I can probably do that somewhat easily. Although I don't know about like terrain deformation, but I should at least be able to have a custom animation for that and stuff. So anyway, that's all neither here nor there, but like, art isn't a huge focus is basically what I'm getting at. And as a result, we don't have a crazy amount of unique tells, but the corpses are important. So we don't want to, the bottom line is we definitely don't want to remove or reduce the duration of corpses simply because, some abilities are really powerful with them. Instead, I think maybe, and again, I think this is irrespective of Reclamation, but I do think Reclamation is a useful canary in the coal mine for this situation, that when you're thinking about it like this, okay, you have the Parasite ability, for example. If you imagine an ability or some sort of mechanism that really benefits from, taking corpses, is it really sensible that, like, I get to use this ability, I get to use this behavior, 30 seconds to a minute after the battle has already done? Like, that's the same level of uninteractiveness as the current Reclamation issue. It's just Reclamation is so powerful that any aspect of it being used is noteworthy. And it really is, like, obvious that, hey, we definitely need to wrap that, rein that in, so to speak. So these are all useful things to cover and to contemplate. And I think that when you're thinking about how this all works together and what these systems really do, it's obvious that reclamation needs to be adjusted. I think I've covered both of the core issues, obviously both stemming from uninteractivity, the fact that corpses can stack and you don't really pay a higher cost for claiming them, obviously, and also the fact that the you think about like the fact that most of it happens away from your enemy. So you again don't pay a cost for doing it really. You just have a little bit of APM cost, but like your opponent can't punish you if you're doing it after their army is already defeated or withdrawn, or you've lost the engagement but you come back to it later. Like even that situation where you should be punished doesn't always happen. And obviously it's also mutated some interactions quite negatively where like you'll attack an enemy, you'll do some damage and you'll lose some units, and then they actually end up better off than they were before simply because they have like a unit that's fairly easy to get. Not that making it harder to get would fix this problem, it would be a bandage, but that's just like another thing that's compounding the issue. So I think as a result, you can kind of see where I'm going here, where the roads are currently leading me to think that you probably want a minimum amount of time, a window of time in which to actually reclaim a corpse or use a corpse for any purpose. And those are such windows that, like, okay, if that makes it really limiting for other abilities, like Parasite becomes less impactful because of this, and maybe like the Ultra Core passive that consumes a corpse to enchant it and get it, moving faster and attacking faster, or like, any of the other corpse things, like we wanted Consume to be maybe target corpses. Obviously, the Vilgora Core consumes corpses passively. Like, if these things are less impactful because of this change, then these are cases where we can maybe buff those abilities and make them more impactful, or revise those abilities in some other way so that they still have good value. But the reclamation case makes it very, very obvious that, well, just from a thought experiment standpoint, forget about what we have already intuited from playing the game and what we've already observed. Just think about doing something with corpses like 30 seconds after the battle has ended. It's not a reason to remove corpses from or stop them from lasting 30 seconds, because lasting that amount of time and longer is good for the visual of the game and basically informing you of how the game has gone and how the map is flowing and stuff, right? And maybe in an ideal world we would find some way to make those almost not really permanent in a strong sense, but like you can imagine in a future game, maybe one of the things we could do is have it so that the corpses take an exceedingly long time to decay. And I guess Warcraft 3 kind of had this where they would have say you kill a grunt, the grunt does his oh ah sound and then falls on the ground. And before he turns into just like flesh and bones, which is like hilariously fast, he has an animation. It's not really an animation. He just sinks into the ground and reveals the corpse. But if like he remained on the ground as a dead body for a longer period, for like say the 15 seconds or 10 seconds or however long the window is to use corpses again, and that's what you needed for resurrection, say, or raise dead or whatever, and then the corpses fell into the ground and became just like unusable, but still signs of what unit was here, ideally. That would be one example of like a hypothetical version of what I'm talking about, where now you can still see that a corpse exists, but if we make it really obvious that this corpse is still valuable, usable, etc., I don't exactly know how we would go about doing it, but we would probably sit like an easy low brow or low hanging fruit way of doing it would be to desaturate and darken the frames of the corpses that are not valuable, that are not viable, and make it so that the top frame is just like the brightest, and therefore you would kind of intuit that over time. Ideally, there would maybe even be something in addition to that indicates like, hey, this unit is still valuable, still viable, but we don't want to make it too intrusive because these corpse consuming abilities aren't like, they're not so common. I mean, they're very transformative in the case of reclamation, and even in some of the other cases I rattled off, they can be quite transformative, but we don't want these corpses to like be flashing lights and doing weird noisy stuff just because eventually you can use them, right? Like maybe in the presence of one of these units, if they were within a certain amount of range, maybe then you would see it, but even then I don't think so. I think we would probably just want to make it obvious that it's viable from the visuals of the corpses themselves, and so hopefully it would be possible to do that, and then we just sort of like darken and desaturate the other frames. That would take a little bit of time, but it shouldn't be impossible, And, from a technical and artistic perspective, this is not an impossible challenge to face. But I do think it would basically help cement the idea of corpse manipulation as something that you do in the middle of the fight. And that really the only case where that wouldn't be the case is if we wanted to do something else that doesn't really care about the corpse timing. But, well, no, I don't even know if we would want to. I was thinking maybe like some sort of rubble salvage program or something that you do where you like get money back from like moving this unit over rubble. But I don't think that would be useful anyway as a specific example. But yeah, I can't really think of anything where we would like, yeah, any corpse is fine, doesn't matter what the stage is. Now, originally I had thought that maybe like your life of the reclaimed unit is dependent on how long the corpse has been on the field, and so it gets lower, the longer it goes. But obviously that's not very useful because you can just heal that to evade it anyway, especially as Terran, which has access to healing. So I do think that at the end of the day, it makes a very heavy amount of sense to go down this approach where we minimize the window. This doesn't account for the stacking issue, and so I was thinking about how that would be done, because obviously you could maybe make it so that the apostle like costs energy per reclaimed unit or something. I was actually thinking that it would be, maybe it could be like energy per amount of HP healed or something, and so then you're still like, you either would spend all of your energy on like a Star Sovereign, for example, or you would spend, some of your energy on a Maverick, right? A small amount or something, as an example. However, that doesn't really, like, it's not really easy to intuit how you would use that stuff, right? So I think it ends up being pretty, potentially quite convoluted, complex. We have an episode of Crow's Nest that I'm currently rendering as I record this that talks about complexity versus depth. I don't know that would be a clean and easy way to achieve the depth that we want. So what we would probably do, I'm kind of spitballing here because I don't actually know about what the solution would be. But one of the things that comes to my mind is, when you're thinking about like the Anti-Chthon, for example, if it just has a maximum number of corpses that it can revive at any given time, that still gets a little bit weird with the case of stacks, because you might have to just keep spamming like the apostle case. Like if the apostle only, reclaims 4 nearby corpses or whatever, then you could make it something like the apostle reclaims 1 corpse every tick, and activates the ability, and Veek proposed something where it would basically be a toggle that you would toggle on, and then maybe each corpse reclaimed is like, I don't know, 50 energy or something like that, or there's a passive drain. I think in his example was something that he proposed. But anyway, the other thing is that like if you take the Anti-Chthon, for example, if it has a maximum number that it can reclaim, then perhaps something that you could do with that is, immobilize it while it's at that, while it's at the cap or something, or maybe in order to use the apostle, like you're immobilized during the channel or something. I'm not sure exactly how it would work out. Maybe you wouldn't even need to bother immobilizing them. But if they can just only reclaim 4 units, and it takes like a channel time for that, like the unit that is being reclaimed is stunned during the reclamation process, and that time is like, I don't know, 2 seconds, even 1 second, 1.5 seconds, then that alone would be pretty huge, because now the Anti-Chthon has a minimum or a maximum number of targets it can resurrect or reclaim every second, right? Or every, whatever, like whatever the channel time is. If it's 1, 2, 1.5 seconds to reclaim the unit, then the Anti-Chthon can only do like 4 maximum every 1 to whatever seconds. And that puts a conceptual cap on the unit. However, I'm trying to combat the stacking issue. Like you could just make it so that it does everything in the area, but that doesn't handle the stacking issue. And that's sort of what I'm targeting here. It does feel kind of lame to put a target cap on stuff like that, in a similar way that it would feel lame to me to put a target cap on the Madrigal, for example. But we are dealing with a case where it's like stacking units. Like maybe I should admit defeat on matters like that, because of the fact that you can get stacking units. Stacking corpses is just way more common, right? Which is why I'm thinking of pulling the trigger on the Anti-Chthon specifically, because you can't really legislate around that. Even in, our first game that we're building in Antikythera, where workers do have collision and air units do have collision, at least with units of their same class, like, fighters fly underneath battle cruisers or whatever. So like as an example, but you're going to have stacking of corpses pretty much no matter what, especially if there's like a choke point where a bunch of units get caught, or, somebody like stuns a bunch of units in a similar area or whatever. Like you can think about stuff like that. And it's just, you're never going to be in a situation where you can 100% avoid that. Veek suggested like spawning the corpses in ways where you don't allow them to be stacked. But I guarantee you, if we did try that, it would look super goofy, where like, because there's already an ocean of corpses somewhere, the corpse count gets like, like you die and your corpse is like teleported to like some spot, 10 meters out of the way, the other way or something. It would just get really silly really quickly, I think. And so I kind of think we have to admit the fact that, yes, there's going to be stacking, and we can't really legislate around that without really goofy consequences. And as a result, maybe we should consider, okay, what do we do then? We have the Antikython, we have the Aeon, which is an effect field. If the effect field if each effect field can only reclaim one corpse at a time, that might be a little bit silly, but you could imagine something like that. You could definitely imagine the Antikython. If the effect field is like a series of nanobots or something, they could be conceptually, they could be like focusing on one corpse at a time, but it's a bit weird because we wouldn't necessarily have good reads for that. We don't even have a unique read for the Antikython field anyway right now. We definitely need a new one for that. I'm going to see what I can do about like generating particle effects in Blender, but it's a bit of a dark art right now, so we'll see about that later, especially considering the palette stuff we have to deal with. But maybe Solstice can help me get set up when he's got a bit more time with that. He was saying he was going to maybe do another modeling stream. He did one for the Scribe. If he ended up going in and doing the, I was thinking the Scribe should probably have some sort of thruster graphic, but it should definitely have an animation for when it's attacking or when it's harvesting, and that would definitely be very useful. Ideally, if they're separate animations as well. So, just like a simple muzzle flash or whatever. And he was specifically going to use the Scribe as an example of like, here's how I do this in Blender. And that would be useful. Like, obviously we could just copy and paste stuff that he's already made for those. And maybe that would be a good idea for like placeholder stuff anyway. I should do that because visibility on those units is pretty bad. Like, they're the only worker sprite in the game where it attacking is not super obvious, especially considering the particle beam weapon hit thing is super tiny. So, and it's super tiny, and it's also not very attention grabbing audio wise, right? Like its audio read is very small. Now that's fine, because if it's attacking and you're using like actual combat units, then that's great. But it's actually quite hard for me to tell, like if I'm trying to attack a Scribe that's scouting me, it's hard for me to tell who it's attacking and when it's attacking and all this other stuff. So anyway, that's a total tangent, but something that we should get wrangled at some point. Now, beyond all of what I just said there, I do think that another thing to keep in mind here is that, we think about the stacking, we think about the effect fields. We're just trying to make the abilities more interactive, right? And again, if we go ahead with this idea that corpses are only viable for 10, 15 seconds, whatever it is, then... Well, it still does open up a potential for you to, like, if you attack into a defending Terran and he has apostles or Antikythons there, you have to be open to the idea that he might reclaim some units because he's already in that position. But, when do you want to attack into a Terran that's entrenched? When you can break them, which is, easier said than done. Like, if you attack with ranged units, say you're attacking as Zerg, you have Pr0totypes. Okay, that's a great unit, because if you've got like Basilisks and Bactylisks, holy shit, I was flashbacking to normal Hydra, Bactylisks and Pr0totypes, and you are attacking some defenses from afar or whatever, say you retreat after losing some units, you can still camp the corpses from a distance, and so the apostles can't walk up and just take it for free. Especially if we institute like the Antikython case, like maybe they're in a situation where they have to, again, like channel and as a result are stuck somewhere, not being able to move or whatever. You could move, you would just not finish the animation probably. That's probably how we would handle it, which might turn into a bit of a clunk fest, but then you would just hold position your units, so I'm not too concerned about that, but that's something that we can discuss later on. So, if we're trying to live in this hypothetical future, like what are some other potential issues? You definitely could still have situations where, in an uninteractive manner, the window is achieved, but I think it would minimize a lot of the issues, I don't know how tight the timing window should be. The cast animation for the Apostle currently is 2 seconds long, so if we make it like something as short as 5 seconds, that's pretty restrictive. Even 10 or 15 might be hard for you to get them unless they're actually in the fight, which is the intended mechanic of how you would use the unit anyway. So that's probably good enough there. And again, if you have like a, say while you're channeling, each corpse costs energy or something, then you do have uh, a cap because you need to wait for energy to come back anyway, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind anyway. So that would help quite a bit for that, for like individual apostles reviving entire armies by themselves. So yeah, I feel like this has the potential. We can still unlock a lot of potential power from the behavior, but we can do so in a way that actually feels fair because you have to start being much more mindful about your corpses and your enemies' corpses when you're facing somebody who has this stuff, but not in a way that's absolutely unfair and uninteractive and just like anti-interactivity, right? So, we have these ambitious behavior ideas and concepts and we execute on them and they don't always hit right out of the gate. So I do think that, we're getting there. We're on the right path conceptually after talking over some of the ideas here. So to summarize again, the proposal that I'm sort of coming to terms with is that for any corpse consumption, it has to happen a certain amount of window, like after the corpse has freshly been made. But like there's say again a 10 to 15 second window where you can use the corpse for whatever reason. And then to combat the stacking issue for reclamation specifically, we would see pretty much just some sort of cost, either energy or it would take, time because of a target cap or whatever. And you obviously combine this with the fact that we have that channel time that immobilizes or stuns or whatever the unit that is being revived, right? The unit from the corpse. That unit would be stunned for that, however long that animation was. And I think, you combine all of this where like you initially start the process, but then you have this range that you have to remain within to finish the process, right? Now there's like a separate thing where people have been discussing like does it make sense for the case where like, oh, my corpses can exist permanently and should we reinstate the idea that you can revive a single unit multiple times or whatever, and like that's kind of a separate thing. I feel like just doing what I've outlined so far would make a lot of sense. You think about the channel time that stuns the unit that's being reclaimed. You think about the fact that there's an energy or time cost to each corpse independently, and like maybe the Antikython just has like a higher maximum count that it can do at the same time. And then you think about the amount of time that you have to actually start this process to begin with being shorter. These all work really well to control the thing and make it much more about using it in the middle of a fight or very shortly after a fight has been concluded. And, none of the units that currently do reclamation are very fast anyway, right? We're not talking about really fast units like a vulture. Like the Apostle moves pretty slowly. It got a little bit of a speed boost recently, but it was like 10% or something. We could even revert that if we felt like that was making the unit a little bit too easy to jump out of safety and then immediately start doing some corpse scavenging. Although even then that's kind of thematic and interesting, and you have a short amount of time to really mine the battlefield of corpses, and maybe that's also fine. But there's an extension of this where Vik proposed that if you keep your reclaimers in a region positionally around the unit that has been reclaimed, you would be talking about like keeping the Apostle or keeping an Antikython or whatever in an area around the reclaimed unit. That's what allows it to remain intact, and otherwise it swiftly decays and will take fatal damage once it ends its lifespan. Kind of like how the Vagrant Shade works right now, if people are unfamiliar with that one. So all in all, I think there's some really neat things to play around with in that respect. I think you kind of look at that and you say, okay, if I have to keep my reclaimed units in an area around the reclaimer units, like the specialist units that do that job, then I can't just like take all of this army and then throw it at my enemy, even if I have secured a bunch of corpses that attacked me as I was defending or something. So I still have to position my army intelligently. And then you also handle the fact that, okay, corpses can stack, and you handle the fact that corpses can stay around for a very long amount of time. That actually is pretty solid, I think. And that is essentially like I think Vik's initial plan was like after 5 seconds of not being actively reclaimed or like in the presence of reclamation, then you're dealing with fast decay. Like maybe the Apostle, Vik's proposal is a little bit more extreme for nerfing the Apostle specifically, which might not be necessary, but we can talk about it here anyway. As I understand it, his proposal is the apostle, again, converts it into some sort of like toggle channel thing. It wouldn't be a channel that immobilizes the unit, but it would be something that would like sort of purposefully keeps the effect going for a certain amount of time. And that's what allows the decay to be held at bay. And after that, there's a rapid, say again, 5-second timer, after which the, unit needs to be saved again, else it will decay very fast. And I don't think that it would passively regenerate either, because that would obviously get in the way of healing. That would make too many things happening on one ability. So you'd be dealing with like even stepping outside of the regenerate, like the reclamation aura that the apostle projects around itself during this cast. If you step out of there for longer than 5 seconds, you start taking damage, and you need to heal that some other way. But it also means you could maybe, like, the rapid decay would be significant. It would be rapid. We are talking about, like, maybe faster than the rate of flash shielding increase, right? Or the flash shielding heal and stuff. And that would be pretty neat anyway. But beyond that, you think about, like, okay, we have that really rapid decay. I can kind of maybe offset some of that with like clerics and shamans to like give them a little bit more time, a little bit more shelf life. And maybe then I can even do a clutch move where I move another apostle into the fray and stuff, or, stall for enough time for the energy regen to restore my capabilities. Also, my whole PC just froze, so I have to check the audio recording. Well, it cut off some waffling, but for the most part, you got the idea. So no problems there. Thanks a lot, Windows. Really appreciate it. I think it's because Vegas is finishing that render I was talking about. So yeah. Interesting stuff. I think we've sort of got a couple of different ideas. I think Veek's change to the apostle, his proposal there, helps to really it interacts really nicely with my proposal because the aura projection thing and each corpse costing its own energy, which is my part of it, kind of works together where like maybe the aura itself, I don't know about that one, because I kind of think about it like, his proposal is that the aura drains energy over time to channel, whereas my proposal is like each corpse drains energy. And so maybe that combined with it would be a little bit too prohibitive, right? Because maybe then you're talking about a case where the aura is like actually super heavy on the energy cost side. So I think maybe there's that collision to resolve. But beyond that, I think conceptually I could imagine them working out really well together, because then, each corpse that maybe you would toggle like I don't even know exactly how it works. I think you would have to maybe have two separate toggles, but that seems really lame. So we might make it so that the corpse thing is a passive generation, so you don't have to channel the aura, and instead you're just paying for it with your positioning, right? Because if you have to keep your reclaimed army alive, then that apostle can't also move over and get more corpses unless the army comes with him, right? And so that could be its own thing where you're like very positional, and that's very, very much a Terran thing, right? What I really like about these proposals wherever they go is that implementing pretty much any of them makes Terran more Terran, makes reclamation more Terran, because it's more positional and more about, moving kind of like a slow crawl of death, or undeath in this case. So I think that part is really neat, really cool, and definitely something that could be done to improve things, right? To make things a little bit more thematically consistent, a little bit more interesting, because you're like scavenging the corpses and stuff. All that stuff. All that stuff is really neat. But also, it obviously makes it more interactive and more fair, and will reduce the amount of times that people will say, oh shit, my enemy has a single unit that can reclaim my entire army. I guess I just won't attack them until I can kill that unit specifically. And then, it becomes a lot like, Mesk drew parallels to like StarCraft 2, where the High Templar and the Ghosts fight each other with point and click abilities. It's not quite that level, because you're not killing them with point and click abilities. You're trying to kill them with normal weapons and stuff, but it is still pretty annoying, right? So anyway, all of that said, I think there's certainly some interesting ideas here, things to consider. I think we will be thinking about what to do next about reclamation. I've already posted my own personal thoughts that I got from this. I had to pause in the middle of one of these recording sessions anyway to hide you guys from a motorcycle that was roaring down the fucking track. So that's great. The track that is the street next to me. But beyond that, I took that time to sort of write my thoughts, collect them, and try to present them to the No Frauds Club. And Yeah, I think that's probably pretty solid. So we'll move on to the next topic now, but hopefully this kind of, just again reiterates the idea that we are as a community, we are as a development team thinking about how to improve the mod, how to improve the game that we've started to work on, right? And we're going back to like the first principles of complexity versus depth. We're reanalyzing a lot of things from that standpoint, and also from the standpoint of interactivity, the same way that we've reanalyzed the ion cannon. And I think our analysis has borne out for that particular problem, because the solution that we've arrived at seems a lot more interactive and a lot more fair and reasonable, as I'm sure you guys will all agree. So with that, well, I've got a couple of other ideas for topics, but I don't think we actually have enough time for me to say them right now. So we'll pause here, and either we'll be ending immediately after this, or I'll have some more to say after Fraudarchy. So, yeah, just keep on listening, homie. All right, it is 2:42 in the afternoon of Sunday, the 9th of April now. We are flash forwarding into another day, and I don't have a crazy amount of thoughts to hit you with at the end of this prototype, so I think we're pretty much through the meat of the issue. We did spend some time talking a little bit more in depth after I sort of recorded all these thoughts. I wrote them down, like I said, and then we had a bit more of a conversation on the server. And it looks like we've arrived at a point of action to look through, right? I've presented my case. Obviously, the initial point that since Veek is very involved in the design process of a lot of these things now, and really his involvement has been steadily increasing the more familiar he's become with the game, with my design philosophy. He kind of knows, like, he agrees with enough of the common ground, like, that we have together as designers, as game players even, right? That he understands that I'm not like going off on some wacky road and leading away from the truth that is good RTS game design. And thankfully enough people also agree with that anyway, because they're playing CMVW. So, as experimental as some of the changes have been lately, at least Veek recognizes that, like, he has built enough of a familiarity that he can actually, present ideas. He's leveled up his own development game in that sense, and then also is able to basically understand how we can mesh our two separate design sensibilities, or however different our design sensibilities may really be in practice. And so we had a little bit of back and forth. Obviously, he didn't really want there to be like a limit on the number of targets that you could have at any one time for the corpse reclamation. But with stacking not being solvable by, displacing the corpses, because obviously you could just, I don't remember if I covered that earlier, but basically if you have a system that displaces corpses, I mean, it might look really awkward, but even if it doesn't look awkward, it's still going to look really dumb when you're in a choke point that's like covered head to toe in corpses, and your unit dies and its corpse ends up like, halfway across a screen, or pushes a bunch of other corpses away or whatever. It's just not going to work out too well, right? So we pretty much need the ability to be able to gate the number of corpses that are taken care of. And this does probably mean that the other corpse mechanics are going to get heavily revised. I'm thinking one of the things that I was thinking about is we'll probably end up seeing a revision to the Convolutk and to the Vilgoricor. Although the Vilgoricor is pretty powerful right now, and I think people are starting to figure that one out. Because each one of them equates to like 2 brood spawn every second. And so the radius for it is quite large, which probably needs to be adjusted just so that they can have their strengths reined in a little bit, right? But, if you're using them in a good matchup for what their purpose is, then you're using them in the front line to kill other units. Or, in addition to some of your own weak units, which obviously are going to leave behind corpses that, even if we reduce the radius of the corpse search for their, reconstitution passive, then it's not really that big of a deal. Ideally, it would be something that, like, it is a channel for the unit or something where they have to do it. But it's kind of weird for that to be automatic. You just have automatic loss of control for the unit or something. We can't implement anything that targets corpses, and that would be a huge APM tax on it anyway. So I'm actually not sure what to do about that one just yet, conceptually. I think if we're going to keep it as an automatic sort of aura passive, then we just have to make the aura range smaller, right? So yeah, there's going to be some revisions for sure if we go this direction of like all corpse related effects are limited in terms of the number of targets that they can have at any given time. But I think that's just a healthier thing because of the fact that you can't really get around the stacking, right? one of the ideas is like maybe we have to apply this to everything. Like maybe the Madrigal actually does need a target cap. Although I honestly think at this point that people have gotten pretty good at defending against magical drops, and also the ambient HP increase of workers really helped with that too, which I wasn't really thinking of. Like it wasn't made specifically to fix magicals, but it kind of did. So at the very least, it reduced the negative impact, like the uninteractive impact part, where you just fly a Trojan in and it still unloads the units or whatever. Now, regardless of all of that, there are definitely some more things that we want to address after this reclamation and corpse generally, this general corpse update. After all of that are taken care of, we do need to figure out what we're going to do with vultures. I posited on the most recent episode of Crow's Nest, which you can go check out on the No Frauds Club YouTube channel, that one of the major benefits or one of the major things that's like still in the game that's a bit of a problem on this line of logic is vulture mine laying. And I do think that the solution to it is probably to give the vultures themselves a channel time. And when they're done with the channel, the mine will spawn burrowed, and you'll probably still hear the burrow sound effect, but maybe it'll have a short window of time where it can't unburrow either, which will allow you to move the vulture around or move units away once you hear the sound cue, right? So there will still be like kind of an arming time, but it will be invisible the whole way through, unless you have detection, of course, or you kill it with splash, obviously, can still be done. But this will be a time where you can use, like, say, if it takes 3 seconds or 2.5 seconds or whatever for the vulture to be immobilized to place the mine, that's still really good, because now you no longer have to split your attention between trying to kill the mine and trying to kill the vulture. And that's obviously a big deal, because in the early game, which is where vultures are accessible, and I don't really want to change that, you are in a situation where vultures end up being kind of like it's just a little bit binary. Like, oh, I throw the vulture down and I throw the mine down, and then the mine just blows up all of my enemy's workers. And I was thinking to myself, like, well, surely people are just playing pretty poorly. And, that part does remain true, but I also don't think that it's particularly good. Like, it's not very interesting for, it's not a skill that I necessarily want to test for, is like, can you place a mine in your opponent's worker line, right? So I think the mines are still in a conceptually healthier place, because they don't have all of this complex shit where based on the kind of unit the target is, they don't fire. It's just, is the unit a ground unit and not a building? Okay, then I can shoot it, right? Like, then I can go after it. That's really all it is. And, it applies to larvae, it applies to eggs, it applies to workers, it applies to other vultures. Like, it's just so much cleaner now. The one issue that you might run into is if you place it near a cliff and a low flight unit like an Anticathon or an Architect triggers it technically, but isn't really in the spot to actually get attacked by it, then you'll just see a lot of spinning probably. If I had to guess, I actually haven't tested that exact case. But beyond that, it's just in a significantly better spot. Like, maybe actually low flight will be mine immune. Maybe that's the solution to that problem, because like they're hovering over terrain or something. I don't really have a strong feeling about that. I think it's probably like the low flight thing seems a little bit wacky anyway, and maybe should be removed as a separate argument. Like, I'm actually not really that sure. I think if Architects were faster but did respect terrain, that would probably be better for them as a unit. So that's probably something we could think. Oh, that, or actually make them an air unit instead of a ground unit, but like one or the other. And I think probably the same is true for, like, maybe the Anticathon will actually just be a flyer instead of being a ground unit. But if it's a flyer, then it's a little bit harder to estimate the aura effect of the reclamation. So who knows? Who knows? I'm not particularly attached to the current sprites and models for any of these units. Eventually, they will need to be remodeled anyway. But these are all just thoughts, right? Now, there's a couple of other things here. I obviously talked about the vulture. Like, the reason I brought up the mine laying is there are still a few mechanics in the game. Still a few interactions in the game that we should improve. But with the ion cannons being so much better, I think that we're really proving that we're on the right track for getting the power of these units wrangled and still having it feel impactful, right? So I think all of that is really neat. I'm interested in other people's opinions and thoughts. Obviously, it's all well and good to say this stuff, but we have to actually implement it. So before the next release gets pushed to the CMBW, like actual full release stuff, you will see some pre-release updates with this corpse revision. All of the things that we talked about here in some form or another. I might not, like, depending on what we decide to actually implement technically, it might be a little bit different. Obviously, the elephant in the room from the previous day's Pr0totype is that every game had some fucking desync problem. The first couple of games were harder to figure out because they were somebody new using release instead of pre-release, and then the last couple of games had some weird ones where, like, the game was basically decided in a few of those. Some of them were still, yet to be determined. And then the other thing we had was where there was one silent one from somebody using Didact Recall and then canceling it with their mouse. It was Shambler who was doing that. And that seems to be a potential desync case, but actually we don't know that for sure. We need to test it. It's definitely desyncing in replays, but then it could have also been something else where it's like just the last command from the last command of this kind sometimes isn't serialized in the replay instead of it being the mouse one specific. Like, it's still just really ambiguous, and we need to really hammer home and figure that out. So what Veek is going to do is transfer all that shit from A's because it shouldn't be there to begin with, and we're going to move it to GPTP. For those who are not technically initiated in all of this stuff, basically this just means taking it from the stupid Rust plugin that shouldn't exist, certainly shouldn't be in Rust, and that's also entirely meant to be AI-centric, but because we were dumb back in the day, iQuare and I decided, just add it to that. Instead of using GPTP for everything. I think that was actually because we were originally using Remastered, and Remastered didn't have a GPTP, but it did have some plugins from Nave, who was programming it in Rust, obviously, which is that's a mistake on his part, but, I can kind of understand you don't like modern C++, but the solution is not to, go to the next incarnation of fucking C++. You just go back to the stuff that worked before, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. Basically, we take everything from that plugin that is gameplay related and isn't AI related, and we port it back, right? The other thing that is unfortunate is that ever since the CCMU extender, the requirement table for AI is fucked. And that means that they're able to lift structures and still train units from them. They're able to build munitions bays from star pads, which is really suspicious. It's like it's using a text parser and thinking star P. Oh, that's the starport. I can build from there. No, obviously not. So I don't know why the fuck that's the case. And then there's a couple of other things. Like, obviously they build simulacra or vassals or whatever from gateways and shit. It's like, what is going on? So that's all the source of A's basically not getting updated with CCMU. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what was happening when we extended the data limit for the unit stat file, and we created units.datex. And that basically means you can have as many unique unit IDs as we want within some sensible reason. And somehow the same thing has been tripped by extending the in-game unit limit of how many units you can have in one game from 1700 to 4095. And that's interesting to me because, I feel like that must be a clue that the same bug has recurred now that we have this seemingly unrelated change, So I feel like that's a line of investigation we can do. Hopefully it's somewhat easy to fix when Veek gets around to investigating that in A's, because obviously I have no idea what I'm doing when I'm looking at A's. So when I'm looking at Rust specifically, I don't think anybody really has an idea what they're doing when they're looking at Rust. It's not very easy to parse, but you know what? You have to download 117 dependencies to even compile A's. So that's how you know it's a really good language. That's it for Pr0totype, though. That's it for some of the things that we have on the horizon. And yeah, obviously, thanks for bearing with us while we remodel and the analogy I gave Veek was basically we want to go through and remodel the house. Well, we have to clean up all these messes we left here first, and all the messes Lard left as well. And that's just so that we're not constantly stepping in stepping over trash bags and shit, just so that we can get to the construction site where we're building more stuff onto the side of the house or whatever. So that's kind of the pardon our appearances while we do some remodeling, basically, is how I'm trying to present this stuff. And ideally we'll have a little bit of an easier time once we quash these issues. But you know what? I'm caught in a time loop because I've probably said that about 100 times working in Brood War. The easier time will come when we are entirely moved on and working in Antikythera, and that time is coming. So stay tuned for more information, and of course, see you in the server. See ya for Fraudarchies. See ya on the various battlegrounds that we have, more of which keep coming every day.